Hi everyone, my name is Simon, and today I'll be showing you how to improve this exterior rendering. So there are a couple of tips coming up, so listen carefully. First thing I'm going to talk about is the composition, overall composition of the image. Although just a little bit before, I'm going to say like the overall image is interesting and the project itself is interesting as well. There are just like in terms of texturing as well, it's extremely simple but efficient. It just lacks a little bit of detail, I think, which is something we're going to have a look at a little bit later on. I think the main problem we have here is what this tiny diagram shows, is that, as you can see here, this is our sky, this is our road, and this is our project here. And this is not even a third of the image. So although like this, in terms of a ratio, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but the thing is, the way this is composed, it is not a good thing. So what I would advise, but well, I cannot really do it here, but one thing I would advise strongly for this kind of project, where basically you're dealing with their extremely repetitive patterns, is instead of showing like the repetition of the projects in some sort of like infinite pattern, which is, it's kind of heavy and not really like the best way to sell an idea, because this looks like there's no unique space for each people living in there, which is not really what you want to show. So what I would advise would be to, well, there's like this little I'm going to redo it, is to go with the frontal view, because when you have something extremely repetitive, what is interesting is to actually take just a part of it. So say you're looking that way, so you have your top of your building here, bottom of your building there, and then you have, just cut it in thirds, and you have like the adjacent building, the other adjacent building, and one of your house here with the driveway, etc., etc. The thing you have to understand here is that you could actually even go with like some sort of a more like even something like that, like really vertical. And the idea here is that you show this is something repetitive by actually cutting it and showing that the thing is sort of like repeating itself. But the thing is, then you can add a lot of details of how, in some sort of like storytelling there, which is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. But basically this kind of framing, I think, is going to be much more interesting and adapted to this kind of projects. And also the thing is, you have to give your project more space, because here basically what you can see is like we're dealing with some sort of like nice vegetation and a really nice sky, sorry. So it would be like it would make more sense to actually make it this way. That way, like, you understand that what's happening is you're not like living just next to a road, you're living like in a nice place with a really cool view, and like the sky is blue and whatever. So that's something that would be interesting, I think. So either do that, but the best thing would be to actually just, or it could go like maybe this actually, it could be fun. We could try that out, just had the idea. So if you don't want to go with like frontal views, I would actually at least just like really crop it this way. So this is something I'm gonna, what's that? Just gonna get rid of this. Anyway, so that was the first thing. Second thing we can think of is getting rid of this. Second thing we can think of is going to be regarding the overall lighting. As you can see, we do lack a little bit of contrast in this image, so it's just a matter of adding like contrast here. So as you can see, it's just a little bit more of mid-grays. The whites are bumped up a little bit, and as you can see, this is more dramatic, and the details and the interesting shades that are created by the shutters there are more like more visible. Second thing you want to think of, when I was talking about the texture, I said like the texturing is simple, but the thing is, one thing you can do when you're dealing with like extremely simple texturing, because you have the same texture everywhere, or the same material, is to actually play around with a little bit of dodge and burn, or burn and dodge, or whatever. So as you can see, like what you should do is to, I'm not going to do it properly, but it's just to select your areas that are supposed to be like in the sunshine and etc., like that, and you just use the burn tool to create slight variation of tints and shades in your textures. You can also recreate interesting transition between shadows and lights, and that's basically like what this interesting tool is for. Just be careful not to burn the glazing, because it looks a little bit weird. You can also use it, but even though like the texture in the foreground is interesting there, you can still have a little bit of fun with it on the road, although I would kind of do something like that. You can also use the Dutch tool on your glazing just to make it a little bit more reflective, just like tiny touch there. I think that's it for the framing. I think it's much better. One thing regarding the so coming back basically to the idea of like unique setup and unique project, even though it's like a repetitive pattern here, the idea is still that anyone, like, you're getting like it's your home, it's not like anybody else's home. So what you need to do is to actually have different stories, or like, because here, as you can see, the problem we have is that everyone is doing the exact same thing, which is a little bit disturbing. Like, this guy has some sort of muscle car and is going back home, this girl is going back home and has some sort of muscle car, and this guy as well, etc. So this is something you want to avoid in terms of storytelling, I'd say. Like, some kind of details that could be really interesting, but it gets a little bit of extra work, is to actually get one of your window open, like slide it open, so that you get a glimpse of what's happening inside. Maybe you have like a painting or a television, or at least see the shades of the furniture that are sitting inside. And like, the idea of having someone at the window is interesting, but it would add like an extra touch of realism if you opened that window. Another thing you can add that is quite working, because you're like looking upward, is to have like ceiling details, such as lampshades or stuff like that. It's also interesting to have, as it's been done here, closed shutters and then open and then closed, etc. So that's really cool. But still, yeah, it's something, I think here I would go with something a little bit more subtle. Something also regarding the integration of people. I've wrote quite a lengthy article regarding that, but I'm gonna have to actually rewrite it and make it a little bit more, like even more accurate. One thing first is that never, maybe it's just never in terms of layer, but anyway, just never make people transparent, because that just doesn't exist. So never do it. It's not necessary. This dude here is not really, like, even if you kept the image the whole width, it's still like it wasn't really working. I think like it was all distorted and not really interesting. One thing you have to be extremely careful with, even if you're just like dealing with black and white, is the feathering of your shadows. As you can see here, we have extremely sharp shadows. They're actually a little bit too sharp, but we have really sharp shadows because the distance here is quite small. If we deal with this car here, for example, the distance between the bumper here and the ground is the same, or it's supposedly the same, or it's quite comparable, which means this shadow here should be much sharper. Same goes with this guy. At least the bottom part of the shadow should be quite sharp, and this could be a little bit feathered. On the contrary, this guy here is the shadow, like this guy here, sorry, is the shadow of this guy. So this should be extremely feathered, whereas this guy, like you can see, the two shadows are comparable, whether this guy is like 1.8 meter and this guy is like maybe 6 meters or something like that. So that's something you have to keep in mind. The other thing as well is to, I think it's been done, but I'm not really sure. But anyway, I'm going to talk about it as well. This is the saturation, as you can see here. So it's been done. Yeah, as you can see, what is in this is in the sun, this is in the shadow, and the shades are always, well, not always, but most of the time, shadows are a little bit less saturated than the highlighted part, which means this guy here has the shadow here, which is less saturated, so that's good. That's a good thing. The second thing you have to check is that the hue is also changing, because as you can see here, this is in the light, this is in the shadow, and this is bluish, and it's just not like orange, dark orange. This is dark blue. Same thing here, so that's good detail you have to keep in mind. So that's the thing, like, as you can see, in terms of colors, everything was done really well, but it's just like the feathering that makes it all look weird, which is a kind of a shame if you think about it. But anyway, this is a little bit too saturated. If I go back there, the overall image here in terms of saturation, because I was a little bit focused on the people here, but just think about saturation in an image is always going to be homogeneous, but if you're in broad daylight, your blue sky is always going to be extremely saturated. So basically this part here is right in terms of realism. This part here as well, because we're dealing with asphalt, so there's nothing much happening in terms of colors, so it cannot be saturated. But the wrong part is regarding the wood, the timber part here, because the only way you could get this sort of saturation would be if this was like a really bright color, not bright color, but an intense colors, just like orange or red plastic or something like that. But you cannot be at least as saturated as the sky, or even like more saturated in that case. So basically what you need to do here is to grab a hue saturation adjustment layer and decrease the saturation until it sort of looks okay. This seems okay to me. Just reverse it and use it on your wood. There you go. That as well. That. Same goes with the vegetation. Like the green of the grass is never going to be. Well, it can be saturated, but because it has some sort of translucency that let the sunlight pierce through, and that can bring up the opacity, the saturation. Sorry, but still, you're never going to have the same saturation. So it would be something like that, I think. See, it's a little bit less saturated, but it's also more realistic. Just regarding this palm tree here, as you can see, like the feathering I guess it was cut, well, yeah, you can see it here, it was cut a little bit too quickly, I'd say. So just be careful when you have, like, especially like when you were dealing with this guy, it was okay because there were lots of them, but still this guy was quite in the foreground. But once you're in this kind of setup where this is the, like, you get the idea that it's continuing there, but this is the only tree in the image, you want to make something a little bit more accurate, and be careful with the feathering. That has to be like basically what you have to keep in mind is that the feather increases the more you get away from the camera. So basically this, since it's sitting in front of this building, cannot be more feathered than the building itself. So as you can see here, it's extremely sharp, so this has to be sharp as well. And I think that's pretty much it for now. So hopefully you've learned stuff regarding how to think about composition when you're dealing with like repetitive housing or projects, and hopefully I'll see you in the next videos, and don't hesitate to comment and drop by. Thank you, guys.
Tonight,